Dust hung like judgment in Bitterroot Square. Sunlight, harsh and unrelenting, beat down on the iron cage bolted to the jailhouse porch. Inside, a woman huddled against the bars, her threadbare dress the color of faded grief. Townsfolk passed, eyes averted or hard with contempt. Vagrant, kinless, a stain on their brittle order. Her fingers, white-knuckled, clutched the ruffle of her shawl, the only shield against stares that scraped her raw. This was the price of poverty in the Montana Territory, 1888. A cage, humiliation, and the crushing weight of being unseen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I got something extra special saved just for you. Silas Grant saw the cage before he saw the town proper. It registered as a wrongness on the edge of his vision as his weary team pulled the buckboard past the last skeletal stand of wind-stunted pines and onto Bitterroot's main street. A knot of unease tightened his gut, familiar yet unwelcome. Trouble. Always trouble clinging to places like this. Dusty outpost pretending at civilization. He shifted on the worn seat, the leather creaking under his weight, a counterpoint to the rhythmic groan of the wagon wheels and the jingle of harness. Behind him, nestled among sacks of flour and salt, crates of nails and bolts of calico, his children were unusually quiet. The journey from his High Valley ranch had been long, the air thick with the scent of sage and dust and the unspoken memory of their mother, gone 2 winters now. His gaze, sharp and weathered like the land itself, swept the street, the false-fronted mercantile, the saloon with its peeling paint, the blacksmith shed belching smoke, before settling irrevocably on the iron contraption welded to the jailhouse porch support, and the figure within. A woman. She was folded into herself, knees drawn up, face pressed against them, long, unwashed hair obscuring her features. Sunlight glinted cruelly off the thick padlock, securing the door. She looked small, impossibly fragile against the brutal iron, like a trapped bird with broken wings. A low sound escaped Silas, almost a growl, swallowed by the dry air. Disgust, cold and sharp, washed over him. He'd seen hardship, God knew, starving winters, cattle blizzards, the slow, wasting fever that stole Martha. But this, caging a human being, it spoke of a meanness of spirit that curdled his blood. It whispered the void Martha's absence had left, the terrifying vulnerability of being alone in a world that ground down the unprotected. He tightened his grip on the reins, the leather biting into his calloused palms. "Pa!" The voice was small, hesitant. Lily, his eldest at 12, leaned forward from the wagon bed, her eyes wide and fixed on the cage. Her hand rested protectively on her younger brother, Eli's, shoulder. What's wrong with that lady?" "Nothing's wrong with her. Lily girl," Silas said, his voice rougher than he intended. He kept his eyes ahead, guiding the horses towards a hitching post outside Miller's mercantile, deliberately placing the wagon between the children and the cage's direct view. Folks here just got a peculiar way of minding their business. He pulled the brake with a sharp rasp, the sound echoing in the sudden stillness. The usual town hum, murmured conversations, the clang from the smithy, seemed muted, watchful. "Stay put," he ordered, swinging down. His boots hit the hard-packed earth, sending up a puff of ochre dust. "Ben, watch the little ones. Lily, mind the supplies." Ben, 10 and trying hard for stoicism, nodded, though his eyes kept darting towards the jailhouse. 4-year-old Maisie whimpered softly, clutching a ragged cloth doll. Silas walked toward the jailhouse, his stride deliberate, the spurs on his worn boots jangling a quiet warning. The heat pressed down, thick and oppressive. He could smell horse dung, wood smoke, and a faint, sour tang of neglect emanating from the cage. He stopped a few feet away, his shadow falling across the bars. The woman didn't move. Only the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her shoulders betrayed she was aware of him. Sheriff Vance emerged from the jailhouse door, thumbs hooked into his belt, a tin star gleaming dully on his vest. He was a thick-set man with eyes like chips of flint and a mouth perpetually set in a disapproving line. "Grant," he acknowledged, his gaze flicking from Silas to the cage and back. "Heard you was coming in for supplies. That brood of yours with you?" "They are," Silas said, keeping his tone level. He nodded towards the cage. "What's her offense, Sheriff?" The question hung in the air, stark. Van spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust near Silas's boot. "Vagrancy. Trespassing on Henderson's back 40. Found her trying to pilfer eggs from his coop. No kin. No place. Town council voted. Cage discourages idle hands and troublemakers." He said it like reciting the weather, devoid of inflection. "Keeps things orderly." "Orderly," Silas repeated, the word tasting like ash. His gaze lingered on the woman's hunched form. He saw the raw skin on her wrist where the iron might have rubbed. He saw the unnatural stillness, the posture of someone trying to vanish. He remembered Martha's quiet strength, the fierce love in her eyes for their children, the way she'd shield them from the world harshness. This woman had no shield, only bars. A fierce, protective anger, unexpected and raw, surged through him. It wasn't just pity. It felt like a violation of something fundamental, something Martha would have raged against. He stepped closer, ignoring Vance's sudden stiffening. He crouched slightly, bringing his eyes closer to the level of the woman's hidden face. The smell of unwashed skin and fear was stronger now. He spoke softly, the gravel in his voice gentled. "Ma'am." Nothing. Not a flinch, not a sound. Only that tremor. He saw it then, parted by her hair as she shifted infinitesimally. A thin, pale scar, jagged and old, running from her temple down toward her jawline, disappearing into the shadow of her collar. A story written in flesh, silent and terrible. His breath hitched. What violence had she known? What pursuit had driven her to steal eggs? Seen enough? Vance's voice was edged with impatience. "Got paperwork." Silas straightened, his eyes meeting Vance's flinty gaze. The anger crystallized into something cold and hard, a resolve forged in the fires of his own loss. "This ain't order, Sheriff," he stated, his voice low but carrying in the quiet street. A few loiterers near the saloon had stopped talking, watching. Deputy Coyle, Vance's shadow, a lean man with restless eyes and a sneer permanently etched on his lips, leaned against a post nearby, idly cleaning his fingernails with a knife. Silas felt Coyle's gaze like a physical touch, cold and assessing. "This is cruelty," Silas continued, holding Vance's stare. "Plain and simple. She ain't an animal to be put on display." Vance's face hardened. "Law's the law, Grant. Ain't your concern. Tend to your brood and your business." "My business," Silas said, the words deliberate, "is seeing this done right." He turned his back on the sheriff, a calculated dismissal. He looked past a wagon. Lily had disobeyed. She stood near the back wheel, clutching something small and dark in her hand. Her eyes, wide and solemn, met his. She took a hesitant step toward the cage, then another. Ben made a small noise of protest, but Lily ignored him. Silas didn't stop her. He watched, his heart a drumbeat against his ribs, as his daughter approached the cage bars. She stopped an arm's length away, her small frame dwarfed by the iron. She held out her hand. On her palm lay a smooth, river-polished stone, deep blue-gray, a treasure she'd found weeks ago and carried ever since. A tiny offering. "Here," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's just for luck." For a long, suspended moment, nothing happened. The woman remained a statue of despair. Then, slowly, painfully slowly, her head lifted, just a fraction. A single eye, dark and bruised with exhaustion and fear, peered through the curtain of hair. It fixed not on Lily, but on Silas. A look of utter bewilderment, mingled with a dawning, terrifying suspicion. Who was this man? Why the girl? Another trick? Another cruelty disguised? That look, The raw vulnerability and profound distrust in that single visible eye shattered something final in Silas Grant, the cautious rancher, the grieving widower. The protector of 5 receded. What rose in his place was pure, unadulterated defiance against the crushing weight of Bitterroot's indifference. The cold resolve in his gut ignited into action. He moved, not towards the sheriff, not towards his wagon. He strode directly to the cage door, his boots striking the wooden porch planks like gunshots in the sudden silence. He ignored Vance's sharp intake of breath, ignored Deputy Coyle pushing off the post, the knife vanishing, hand dropping toward his holster. Silas's own hand went not to his gun, but to the heavy iron padlock. He wrapped his fingers around it, feeling the cold bite of the metal, the sheer, stupid weight of the town's malice it represented. He braced one boot against the porch support, muscles bunching under his worn shirt. He didn't shout, didn't curse. The words, when they came, were gritted out, low and fierce, carrying the weight of his grief, his responsibility, and a sudden, reckless compassion. Enough. With a grunt of effort that tore from his chest, Silas Grant pulled. Metal shrieked against metal. The hasp securing the padlock to the cage door groaned, twisted, and with a final, protesting crack, it tore loose from the weathered wood. The heavy padlock, still locked, dangled uselessly from the mangled hasp in his hand. The cage door, suddenly free, swung open with rusty whine, revealing the huddled woman within. Dust motes danced in the sudden shaft of light, invading her dark space. Silas stood there, breathing hard, the broken lock heavy in his fist. The street was utterly silent now. Every eye was on him. Vance's furious glare, Coyle's predatory stillness, the townsfolk's shocked faces, Lily's awe, and the woman in the cage. She had flinched violently at the sound, pressing herself back against the far bars, her uncovered eye wide with pure animal terror, fixed on the deputy. Coyle hadn't drawn his revolver. Not yet, but his hand rested on the polished walnut grip, his knuckles white, and his sneer had vanished, replaced by a chilling, focused intensity as he stared not at Silas, but at the cage woman. His voice cut through the silence, cold and deliberate, aimed like a bullet. "Well now, Jane Doe," Coyle drawled, the false name dripping with venom. "Looks like you found yourself a knight. Pity you won't be riding far." The broken lock hung heavy in Silas's hand, cold iron biting into his palm. Deputy Coyle's words. Pity you won't be riding far, coiled through the stunned silence of Bitterroot Street like a rattler poised to strike. The woman in the cage flinched back as if physically struck, her single visible eye wild with terror, fixed solely on Coyle. That look, more than the deputy's sneer or Sheriff Vance's sputtering outrage, propelled Silas forward. "Out!" Silas commanded, his voice low but cutting through the tension. He tossed a mangled lock onto the jailhouse porch with a dull clang that made Vance jump. He reached into the cage, not grabbing, but offering a hand. The woman recoiled further, pressing into the rough iron bars. Her breath hitched, ragged and shallow. Silas saw the raw fear, the ingrained mistrust. He dropped his hand but held her gaze steady. "Ain't staying here," he stated, the simplicity of it anchoring the chaos. "Wagons there. Children are there." He gestured with his chin toward the buckboard where Lily stood frozen, the blue-gray river stone still clutched in her outstretched hand. Ben had pulled Maisie close, the little girl burying her face in his shirt. A low growl rumbled from Coyle. His hand hadn't left his revolver grip. Vance found his voice, thick with fury. "Grant, you just destroyed town property. Interfered with lawful punishment. I oughta—" "Do what you gotta, Vance," Silas cut in, turning his back on the lawman. A deliberate act of dismissal that felt like walking into gunfire. His focus remained on the cage woman. He saw the tremor in her hands, the way her knuckles were white where she gripped her shawl. He saw the jagged scar again, a pale lightning bolt against her temple. The weight of 5 children, the echoing emptiness of his ranch without Martha, the sheer recklessness of this act, it all pressed down. But the image of Martha's fierce compassion, Her unwavering belief in sheltering the vulnerable rose stronger. "Your choice, ma'am," he said, quieter now, meant only for her. "Stay with this, or come with us. Won't touch you, won't cage you." For a heartbeat, she remained motionless, a trapped creature assessing a new snare. Then, slowly, painfully, she uncurled. She didn't take his hand. She pushed herself up using the bars, her movement stiff, brittle. The threadbare dress hung loose on her frame. She kept her head down, hair curtains shielding her face. But as she shuffled toward the open cage door, her hand darted out, snatching the smooth river stone from Lily's still-offered palm. Her fingers closed around it like a lifeline, clutching it to her chest as she stumbled past Silas, towards a wagon, not looking back. "Get her out of here, Grant," Vance shouted, red-faced. "But mark me, this ain't over. Coil." Silas didn't acknowledge them. He kept his body between the woman and the lawman, his own hand resting near the worn walnut grip of his coat. He felt Coil's gaze, cold and predatory, boring into his back, tracking the woman's every faltering step. He helped her scramble awkwardly into the wagon bed, where she immediately shrank into a corner, wedging herself between a sack of flour and a crate of nails, pulling her knees up, making herself small. Her eyes darted toward the town, towards Coil, then squeezed shut. She clutched the stone so tightly her knuckles bleached white. Up front, "Lily Ben," Silas ordered, his voice tight. "Keep Maisie between you. Sam, Clara, stay low." The two younger children, previously hidden amongst the supplies, peeked out. Sam, 7, wiry and wide-eyed like a startled jackrabbit, immediately ducked back down. Clara, 6, with Martha's quiet eyes, stared at the huddled woman, her small face solemn. Silas swung up on the driver's seat, released the brake with a harsh scrape, and snapped the reins. "Hiya." The team lurched forward. He didn't look back, but the pressure between his shoulder blades, the imagined sight of Coil's hand hovering near his gun, felt like a physical thing. He took the long way home. Not the direct trail south to his high valley, but a winding, rocky path east, skirting the base of the Garnet Hills where the pines grew thicker and the dust gave way to stubborn clumps of bitterroot and sage. The sun dipped low, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to grasp at the wagon wheels. The air cooled rapidly, carrying the sharp scent of pine resin and the distant cry of a coyote. Inside the wagon, silence reigned, thick and uneasy. Maisie whimpered softly. Lily whispered reassurances. Ben sat rigid, scanning the trail behind them, his young face set in an imitation of his father's grimness. Sam fidgeted nervously. Clara quietly unfolded a ruffled blanket, one Martha had woven, and, moving with surprising gentleness, draped it over the woman's hunched shoulders. The woman flinched at the touch of the wool, but didn't open her eyes. She pulled the blanket tighter, burrowing deeper into its scant warmth, the river stone still clenched in her fist. Silas drove until the twilight bled into indigo, and the first stars pricked the vast Montana sky. He chose a campsite tucked into a stand of pines beside a shallow, chattering creek, sheltered, defensible. He unhitched the team, his movements efficient, automatic, while his mind churned. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every snap of a twig, set his nerves alight. Coil won't let this lie. The deputy's focused intensity on the woman, the personal venom in his voice, wasn't just about town order. It was hunting. Silas checked the loads in his coat, the action smooth, practiced. He remembered Martha's last days, the helplessness as the fever stole her breath, the quiet agony of watching life slip away despite all his strength. He couldn't fail again. Couldn't let this broken woman be dragged back to that cage, or worse, by that cold-eyed deputy. He built a small, contained fire, its flickering light pushing back only a small circle of the immense darkness. He handed out hard biscuits and dried venison. The children ate quietly, their eyes constantly drawn to the woman who remained curled in the wagon bed, a shadow amongst the supplies, the blanket a dark mound. Silas approached slowly, holding out a biscuit and a canteen. "Need to eat," he said, his voice rough in the firelit quiet. She didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly her head turned. Her eyes, reflecting the firelight, met his. The raw terror had subsided into a watchful exhaustion, deep and bruised. She looked at the biscuit, then at his face, searching. Finally, she reached out a trembling hand and took the biscuit, but not the canteen. She nibbled at it, tiny, bird-like bites, her gaze never leaving his. The silence stretched, filled only by the creek's murmur and the crackle of the fire. Silas crouched nearby, not too close, cleaning his rifle with meticulous care, the smell of gun oil sharp in the cool air. The familiar ritual soothed his frayed nerves. He felt Lily's anxious gaze, Ben's stoic watchfulness, Sam's nervous energy, Clara's quiet empathy, and Maisie's sleepy confusion. The weight of them, the responsibility, was a constant pressure. Adding this woman, this hunted stranger, felt like balancing on a crumbling cliff edge. Suddenly, the woman spoke. Her voice was a hoarse whisper, barely audible over the creek, cracked from disuse and fear. She didn't look at Silas, but down at the river stone in her hand, turning it over and over. "Elara," she breathed, the word fragile as spun glass. "My name is Elara." She paused, her throat working. Her fingers traced a jagged scar on her temple, a gesture filled with remembered pain. Her eyes flickered towards a dark trail, leading back towards Bitterroot, then back to Silas, filled with a dread that chilled him more than the night air. Coil, he doesn't forget. He doesn't lose. She swallowed hard, the sound loud in the stillness. He killed. Her voice choked off. She couldn't say it. She just shook her head, a desperate, silent plea swimming in her firelit eyes. Before Silas could react, Ben stiffened. He'd been staring into the darkness beyond firelight, down the trail. His whisper cut through the tension like a knife. "Pa horses." Silas was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand, the cleaning rag forgotten. He strained his ears. At first, nothing but creek, the wind sighing in the pines. Then, faint but unmistakable, carried on the cold night air, the rhythmic clop, clop, clop of shod horses, on hard ground, getting closer, coming from the direction of Bitterroot. Elara gasped, a sound of pure terror, shrinking back into the wagon, pulling the blanket over her head like a shroud. The river stone clutched against her heart. Silas motioned sharply. Lily gathered Maisie close, pulling her down into the wagon bed beside Elara. Ben grabbed Sam and Clara, pushing them low behind the wheel. Silas stepped forward, placing himself squarely between the approaching sound and his makeshift family, the firelight glinting dully on the barrel of his Winchester. He levered around into the chamber. The metallic snick-click echoed like a death knell in the vast, watchful darkness. The hoofbeats grew louder, steady, purposeful, emerging from a black veil of pines just beyond the fire's dying reach. The hoofbeat stopped. Abruptly, Silas's finger rested lightly on the Winchester's trigger, his breath a plume in the sudden, brittle silence. The fire crackled, an obscenely cheerful sound against the immense, watchful darkness pressing in. The unseen riders had halted just beyond the fire's frail circle of light, hidden by the thick wall of pines and the night's heavy cloak. Silas could feel them. 5 pairs of young eyes, wide and unblinking, stared from the wagon bed where Lily shielded Maisie and Elara. Ben held Sam and Clara low. Elara's tremors vibrated to the wagon boards. She'd pulled the blanket completely over her head, becoming a small, terrified mound, the river stone likely cutting into her palm. A voice cut through the stillness, rough but lacking Coil's venomous edge. "Hold the camp. That's you, Grant." Silas didn't lower the rifle. "Who's a skin?" His voice carried flat and hard. "Riley. Tom Riley from the Box K. And Jed Carter." A pause. Leather creaked as a rider shifted. "Saw your fire. We're tracking a couple stray heifers heading back north. Thought it might be trouble camped here." Relief warred with wariness. Riley was a decent hand. Worked for a spread east of Silas's valley. Carter was quieter, kept to himself. Not Vance's men. Not Coyle. Silas eased the hammer down slowly, the metallic click unnaturally loud. No trouble here, Riley. Just me and mine heading home late. He kept his body squarely between the voice and the wagon. Two figures materialized at the edge of the firelight, leading their horses. Riley, broad-shouldered and bearded, squinted into the camp. Carter, leaner, hung back, his gaze sweeping the wagon, lingering on the huddled shape under the blanket before flicking away. Late indeed, Riley rumbled, his eyes taking in Silas's stance. The ready rifle. Heard some ruckus down in Bitterroot today. Something about you and Vance locking horns over. Well, he nodded almost imperceptibly towards the wagon. Folks are talking. Silas felt a fresh wave of tension tighten his shoulders. News traveled fast on the wind in the territory. Town business, he said dismissive. Got handled. Riley spat into the fire, the spittle sizzling. Maybe, but Deputy Coyle ain't one to let things lie. Rode out hell-bent for sundown, alone. Headed this general direction. Near as I could tell. Looked like a man on a hunt. He met Silas's gaze, a flicker of unease in his own. Just thought you ought to know. Ain't no skin off my nose, but... He trailed off, the unspoken warning hanging heavy. Watch your back. Carter, silent until now, added in a low murmur, man's got a mean streak, Grant, wider than the Missouri. His eyes darted again to the blanket-covered form in the wagon. There was no judgment in his look, only a grim understanding of the kind of danger Coyle represented. Obliged to the news, Silas said, his voice tight. Heifers head north. You'll hit open range past the third ridge. He made no move to invite them closer. The message was clear. Riley nodded, tugging his hat brim. Right. We'll move on. You watch yourself, Grant. And... He hesitated, glancing at the children's wide, fearful eyes peeking from the wagon. Watch them. He and Carter mounted up, the horses snorting plumes of steam in the cold air. With a final nod, they melted back into the darkness, the sound of their hooves fading rapidly northward. The silence that followed was deeper, colder. The warning about Coyle actively hunting, riding alone, stripped away any illusion of temporary safety. Silas lowered the rifle fully, his knuckles white. He turned back to the wagon. Lily was coaxing Maisie to sit up, murmuring soothing nonsense. Ben helped Clara down, the little girl immediately moving to gather more small branches for the fire, her movements precise, focused. Sam scrambled out, restless energy returning, kicking at a pine cone. But all eyes, eventually, drifted to the blanket mound that was Elara. Slowly, like a creature emerging from hibernation, the blanket lowered. Elara's face was pale as bleached bone in the firelight, her eyes huge, dark pools reflecting the flames. She wasn't looking at the children or at Silas. She stared into blackness where Riley and Carter had vanished, as if expecting Coyle to materialize from the void. Her hand, clenched around the river stone, pressed against her chest, right over the jagged scar on her temple. Her breathing was shallow, rapid. Silas banked the fire, adding the branches Clara brought. The light steadied, pushing the shadows back a little further. He passed around more water. Elara accepted the canteen this time, taking small, desperate sips, her eyes still fixed on the darkness. Silas sat nearby, not too close, cleaning his rifle again, the ritual a grounding force against a rising tide of unease. The smell of gun oil was sharp, clean. He watched his children. Ben took up position near the edge of the firelight, staring south, towards Bitterroot, mimicking his father's vigilance. Sam paced nervously, picking up stones and throwing them listlessly into the trees. Lily sat beside Elara, not touching, but a solid, quiet presence. Clara, finished with her task, climbed back into the wagon and retrieved her rag doll. She didn't play. She simply held it, watching Elara with those unervingly calm eyes. Hours crept by. The fire burned low. The children, exhausted by fear and travel, eventually succumbed to sleep. Maisie curled into Lily's side. Sam slumped against a wheel, head lolling. Ben sat propped against a tree root, eyes stubbornly open but glazed with fatigue. Clara lay near Elara, her doll tucked under her chin, breathing softly. Only Silas and Elara remained truly awake, bound by shared tension in the fragile circle of light. Silas was checking the wagon's brake mechanism, a pointless task in the dark, when he heard it, a soft choke sound. He looked up. Elara was crying, not loud sobs, but silent tears carving tracks through the dust on her cheeks. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring into the embers, her fingers tracing the scar over and over, as if trying to erase it. The river stone lay in her lap, catching the dim glow. He didn't speak. He just waited. The vast Montana night pressing in, the memory of Martha's quiet strength like ghost beside him. Her whisper, when it came, was raw, scraped from a place of deep pain. He wasn't always like that. She didn't say Coyle's name, but it hung in the air between them. Knew him years back. Different territory. He worked for my Pa ranch hand. Her fingers dug into her temple, pressing against the scar. Pa trusted him. A shudder racked her frame. There was money, a cattle drive payment, hidden in the house. Her voice dropped even lower, trembling. Coyle knew. Came that night. Storm raging, thunder like cannon fire. Pa! She swallowed convulsively, unable to say the words. I tried to stop him, grabbed the fireplace poker. Her hand flew to the scar, fingertips tracing its jagged length. He was faster, laughed, said I was a feisty little thing, not worth a bullet. She closed her eyes, tears squeezing out. Just the poker, backhanded. Left me in the blood with the money gone in the fire. Her voice dissolved into a whimper, the memory of the burning ranch house echoing in her fractured words. He took everything. Everything. Silas felt the story like a physical blow, the casual brutality, the betrayal, the reason for her terror, her rootlessness. The scar wasn't just a mark. It was a monument to the night her world ended. His grip tightened on the rifle stock. Coyle wasn't just enforcing town law. He was silencing a witness, hunting down loose ends. Elara wasn't just poor. She was living evidence. He moved then, slowly, not towards her, but to the edge of the camp near where Ben drowsed. He scanned the tree line, the darkness now feeling infinitely more hostile. Every rustle of a night creature, every sigh of wind in the pines, felt like a stealthy approach. He knows she's here. He knows what she knows. The weight of responsibility settled heavier, colder. Protecting Five was a mountain. Protecting Five and a hunted woman from a killer deputy felt like holding back a flood with bare hands. A flicker of movement caught his eye. Low, near the ground, about 50 yards down the trail towards Bitterroot. Not an animal. Too deliberate. Silas froze, every sense screaming. He squinted, straining against the gloom beyond the fire's dying reach. Nothing. Had he imagined it? The wind hissed through the pines, a mournful sound. Then he saw it. A tiny, distinct glow. Bright orange. Then gone. Then again, a brief pulse in the darkness. A cigarette being drawn on. Silas's blood turned to ice. He didn't need to see the face. The deliberate placement, just outside effective rifle range in the dark. The casual act of smoking while watching. It was a message. A predator marking its territory. Coyle was here. He'd found them. He wasn't rushing. He was savoring the hunt. Silas's hand tightened on the Winchester. He glanced back at the sleeping children, at Elara's tear-streaked, terrified face now turned towards him, having followed his gaze. Her eyes mirrored his own dawning horror. The fragile bubble of momentary safety shattered. The shadow in the pines wasn't just watching. The cigarette glow vanished, swallowed by the blackness. Silas didn't lower the Winchester. The silence now was absolute, oppressive, broken only by the frantic hammering of his own heart against his ribs and Elara's choke whimper from a wagon. He's here, watching, waiting. The knowledge settled like frost in Silas's bones. Coyle wasn't rushing. He was savoring the fear, letting it seep into the camp like poison, a predator playing with corner prey. Silas moved. Swiftly, silently. He roused Ben with a touch, a finger to his lips. The boy's eyes snapped open, instantly alert, the fatigue burned away by adrenaline. Ben, edge of the light. Listen. Anything moves, you whisper. Ben nodded, scrambling to his feet, grabbing a stout branch, his jaw set in a grim mimicry of his father. Lily, Silas hissed. Get Maisie deeper in the wagon. Stay down. Sam, Clara, behind the big pine. Now. His voice was low, urgent, brooking no argument. Lily gathered the sleepy, whimpering Maisie, pulling her close in the wagon bed beside Elara, who had drawn the blanket back over her head, her trembling visible even under the wool. Sam, wide-eyed but trying to be brave, grabbed Clara's hand. The younger girl didn't resist, her doll clutched tight, her quiet gaze fixed on Silas with unnerving calm as Sam pulled her behind the thick trunk of a nearby ponderosa. Silas knelt by the dying fire, quickly adding the driest branches Clara had gathered earlier. The flames flared, casting longer, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe against the trees. Light was both shield and target. He scanned the tree line, the Winchester cold and steady in his hands. Every rustle of sagebrush, every creak of settling timber, screamed ambush. Elara's story echoed, the storm, the poker, the blood, the fire, Coyle's laughter. Silas's knuckles whitened on the rifle stock. He'd faced blizzards, drought, grizzlies. But this? A man who hunted women and children for silence? It was a different kind of wilderness, colder and crueler. A small sound came from the wagon. Elara had lowered the blanket again. Her face was ash-gray in the firelight, tears still tracing paths through the dust, but her eyes weren't fixed on the darkness now. They were on Silas. A flicker of something besides terror, a desperate, questioning hope. Her hand, still clutching the smooth river stone, moved shakily to the collar of her threadbare dress. Fingers fumbled, trembling violently against the worn fabric. She seemed to wrestle with herself, fear warring with a sudden, fierce need. Finally, with a gasp that was half sob, she tore at the collar seam. A small, tarnished silver locket, shaped like a heart, tumbled into her palm. It was dented, the chain broken. She held out toward Silas, her arm shaking, the firelight catching the scratch metal. "My pa," she whispered, the words raw scrapes. His picture inside, only thing left. Her voice broke. "Coyle," he tore it off me. "That night," laughed, said a dead man didn't need reminders. She choked back a sob, her fingers closing protectively over the locket. I sewed it back in. After. The admission cost her, a fragment of her hidden strength laid bare. It wasn't just a trinket. It was defiance, a secret act of preserving love amidst horror. Silas met her gaze. He saw the depth of her loss, mirroring his own. Martha's face swam before him. Not the fever-wasted ghost of her end, but her vibrant smile, the way she insisted on taking a starving stray dog one brutal winter. "Everyone deserves shelter from the storm, Silas," she'd said, her hand warm on his arm. The memory was a lance of pain, but also a compass. He gave Elara the smallest nod, an acknowledgement that passed between them in the firelight. He understood the weight of that locket. "Keep it safe," he murmured. He won't touch it again. The promise hung heavy, a vow made in the flickering light against the pressing dark. He turned his attention back to the perimeter. "Ben, anything?" "Just when, Pa?" Ben whispered back, his voice taut. "And maybe a horse shifting?" "Far off. Can't tell. Too far for Coyle's horse to be heard shifting unless." Silas's blood ran cold. Unless Coyle wasn't mounted anymore, unless he was circling closer, on foot, Silas scanned the deeper shadows beyond Ben's post. Nothing. The tension was a wire stretched to breaking. He needed to check the wagon, the team. He couldn't leave the children exposed. "Lily," he said, low and urgent. "Take this." He pulled the skinning knife from his belt, its blade honed sharp, and handed it hilt first through the wagon slats. "You see anything that ain't us, you yell. Loud." Lily's eyes were huge, but she took the knife, her hand steadying as she wrapped her other arm tighter around Maisie. "Yes, Pa." Silas moved quickly to the front of the wagon, keeping low. The two draft horses, Buck and Daisy, stood hobbled nearby, their heads down, dozing. He ran a hand down Buck's warm flank, checking the harness. Leather seemed intact. He moved to Daisy, then froze. The smell hit him first. Sharp, acrid, out of place. Kerosene. His hand flew to the brake mechanism. It was slick, doused. He traced his fingers down the wooden shaft to the critical iron linkage that connected the brake lever to the wheels. It was coated in the same pungent fluid, and wedged precariously against the grease joint, almost invisible in the gloom, was a single fat lucifer match. Sabotage. Simple, brutal, effective. Yank the brake lever hard to stop. The friction ignites the kerosene-soaked wood. Fire races up the shaft, panic chaos. A burning wagon trapping them all. Coyle's signature. Fire, just like Elara's home. A message and a murder method rolled into one. Silas carefully, delicately, plucked the match free, his fingers trembling with suppressed rage. He wiped the kerosene from the linkage with his bandana, the smell clinging to his skin, a vile perfume of malice. He returned to the firelight, holding up the match. Elara saw it, understood instantly. A strangled cry escaped her hand flying to her scar. The children stared, sensing the new layer of danger. "He was here," Silas said, his voice dangerously quiet, "while we watched the trees. Cut the hobbles." He glanced. The ropes were intact. Coyle was bold, not reckless. He'd slipped in from a blind side, done his work, slipped out, a ghost in the night. "Wagons rigged to burn if we brake hard." Ben's face crumpled for a second, a child's fear breaking through the stoicism. Sam sucked in a breath. Clara pressed her doll's face against her chest. Lily held the knife tighter, her knuckles white. Maisie began to cry softly against her sister's shoulder. Elara curled tighter. The locket and the stone both pressed to her heart, her eyes wide pools of rekindled terror. Silas tossed a match into the fire. It flared brightly for a second, then vanished into ash. The act felt futile. Coyle was still out there, a phantom armed with patience and cruelty. The fragile sense of having a plan evaporated. They couldn't stay. They couldn't flee safely with the brake sabotaged. Moving the wagon slowly, without using the brake on any incline, was near impossible, especially in the dark over rough terrain. Trapped, he looked at his children's frightened faces, at Elara's shattered expression. Martha's voice whispered again, not about shelter now, but about the fierce, unyielding love that fueled protection. "You fight for them, Silas Grant. You fight dirty if you have to." He made a decision. They'd move at first light, brake or no brake. They'd take the risk. He'd walk beside the wheel, use a rock as a chock if needed. Anything was better than waiting for Coyle's next move. He started giving quiet orders, preparing them for the perilous journey. "Ben, you'll walk point with me. Lily, you hold Maisie tight in the wagon. Keep that knife ready. Sam, Clara, you stay in the bed. Hold on tight. Elara," he met her eyes. "You ride. We're leaving at dawn." He turned to check the eastern horizon for the first gray hint of morning. As he did, a stone, no larger than a hen's egg, arced out of the darkness from the direction opposite where he'd seen the cigarette glow. It landed with a soft thud in the embers of the fire, sending up a spray of sparks. Before the ashes settled, a voice cut through the night, cold, amused, and terrifyingly close. Not from the trees, but from the rocks barely 20 yards behind Clara and Sam's hiding place. "Dawn's a long time coming, Grant," Deputy Coyle drawled, his voice slicing to the fragile quiet. "And that wagon ain't going anywhere. Why don't you send the woman out? Save the children the unpleasantness." Coyle's voice hung in the frigid air like gun smoke. "Send the woman out." The rocks behind Sam and Clara's pine tree seemed to breathe malice. Silas didn't move, didn't speak. His mind raced, colder than the frost crystallizing on the sagebrush. Directly engaging meant exposing the children. Waiting meant letting Coyle dictate the terms of slaughter. Martha's face flashed, not in sorrow, but in fierce clarity. "Fight dirty." "Ben." Silas breathed, the sound barely carrying. "The kerosene can. Near the back wheel. Slow." Ben, crouched at the fire's edge, nodded once, a shadow melting towards the wagon's rear. Silas kept his Winchester leveled towards the rocks, his body a shield for Lily and Maisie in the wagon bed. Elara was frozen, the locket and river stone pressed to her chest, her eyes wide with the memory of fire. "Unpleasantness?" Silas called out, his voice deliberately flat, buying Ben precious seconds. "You mean like burning folks alive in their homes? Like cracking a poker over a girl's head for trying to save her pa?" He saw the flicker of movement behind the rocks, Coyle shifting, startled by the directness, by the revelation thrown back at him. Elara gasped. Silas's words were a key turning in a rusted lock. The paralyzing terror in her eyes fractured, replaced by a surge of raw, ancient rage. The locket bit into her palm. Her pa. She looked at Lily, white-knuckled holding the skinning knife, at Maisie trembling against her sister. These children. The hunted look vanished, replaced by something fierce and protective. She didn't stand, but her voice, when it came, was clear, cutting through the tension like broken glass. "His name was Elias Thorne," she shouted toward the rocks, the name echoing in the basin. "And you're nothing but a thief and a murderer, Jed Coyle, a coward who hides in the dark." A guttural snarl erupted from the rocks. Coyle hated being named, being known. His revolver barked, a tongue of orange flame licking the pre-dawn gloom. The bullet splintered when near the wagon's front corner, where Silas had been seconds before. Silas had anticipated the reaction, sidestepping as he fired. His shot wasn't aimed to kill, but to flush. It ricocheted off a boulder near Coyle's position, showering sparks. Chaos erupted. Maisie screamed. Sam scrambled deeper behind the pine. Clara clutched her doll, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. Ben reappeared, the small kerosene can held low. He didn't hesitate. With a strength born of terror and fury, he hurled it towards the base of the rocks where Coyle was hidden. The can clattered, spilling its pungent contents. "Lily!" "The fire!" Silas roared. Lily reacted, not with a knife, but with a burning branch she'd snatched from the campfire the moment the first shot rang out. She lunged from a wagon bed, her arm a whipcord, and flung the flaming brand towards a dark stain spreading on the ground near the rocks. Whoosh! The kerosene ignited with a hungry roar, a wall of fire leaping up, illuminating the rocks, the pines, and the stark, furious figure Deputy Jed Coyle caught mid-rise, his revolver swinging towards Lily. The fire wasn't big enough to trap him, but it was a searing, shocking beacon. "No!" Coyle bellowed, momentarily blinded, flinching from the heat. His shot went wide, wild. It was the opening Silas needed. He fired again, not a ricochet shot. True, the Winchester's crack was sharp, final. Coyle jerked backwards as if punched, a dark flower blooming high on his right shoulder. His revolver clattered onto the stones. He clutched a wound, his face contorted in pain and disbelief, silhouetted against the flames. The predator was cornered, wounded. Silas advanced, Winchester steady. "Move an inch toward that gun, Coyle, and the next one's between your eyes." His voice was glacial. "Ben, get the gun." "Lily, knife on him." Ben darted forward. scooped up the colt, his hands trembling but determined. Lily scrambled down, the skinning knife held out before her like a talisman, positioning herself between Coil and the wagon. Sam peeked out, eyes huge. Clara stopped crying, watching. Coil slumped against the rock, breathing raggedly, his flinty eyes burning with hate. "Won't matter," he spat, blood flecking his lips. "Vance, others know she's a thief. Know you broke the law." Before Silas could respond, hoofbeats pounded the trail from the north. Tom Riley and Jed Carter burst into firelight, rifles drawn, taking in the scene. The burning patch near the rocks, the wounded deputy, Silas standing guard, the children huddled, Elara visible in the wagon, her face defiant. "Jesus, Grant." Riley breathed, lowering his rifle, heard the shots, figured, his gaze settled on Coil. "That the hunting you were doing, deputy?" "Man's a murderer," Silas stated flatly, not taking his eyes off Coil. "Killed her pa years back. Elias Thorne. Robbed him. Left her for dead. Tried to burn us out tonight." He gestured with his chin to the kerosene slick brake linkage. Carter spat. "Explains a mean streak." He moved his rifle to cover Coil. "We'll take him. Box K's closer than Bitterroot. Henderson'll see he stands trial. Proper-like." There was grim satisfaction in his voice. "Frontier justice witnessed." Riley nodded. "Reckon Vance might have some questions, too, especially when we tell him about the fire starting." He dismounted, pulling rope from his saddle. "You all right, Grant?" "The young uns." Silas finally lowered the Winchester, the tension leaching from his shoulders, leaving exhaustion. "We're whole," he said, his gaze sweeping over his children. Ben holding Coil's gun like a prize, Lily lowering the knife, her arm shaking, Sam emerging fully, Clara wiping her tears, Maisie clinging to Elara. Elara met his look. The terror was gone, replaced by a profound, trembling relief and something else, a dawning recognition of safety. The journey back to Silas's High Valley ranch took 2 days, the sabotage break forcing slow, careful progress. Riley and Carter, with a trusting sullen Coil in tow, rode ahead. News traveled faster than their wagon. Sheriff Vance met them at the valley's mouth, his face unreadable. He took in the children, Elara sitting straight now beside Silas, the determined set of Riley and Carter. "Grant," Vance acknowledged stiffly. Riley sent word. Coil's actions seemed clear. Box K'll hold him till the circuit judge. Town council. He cleared his throat, avoiding Silas's eyes. "Regrets the misunderstanding about the cage." It was as close to an apology as Bitterroot would muster. He turned his horse and rode away, leaving the valley open before them. Home, the weathered ranch house, the sturdy barn, the pastures greening with spring. It wasn't safety absolute. The frontier offered no guarantees, but it was sanctuary earned. Silas worked from dawn till dusk, the children falling into familiar rhythms. Ben helped mend fences, pride replacing stoicism. Lily managed Maisie and the hearth. Sam chased chickens with renewed vigor. Clara tended a small patch of earth near the porch. And Elara? She worked, silently at first, mending clothes, helping Lily cook, her movements gaining confidence. One afternoon, Silas found her sitting on a stump near the barn, Clara beside her. Elara was showing the girl the tarnished locket, her voice soft as she traced the dented heart. "And he had kind eyes, Clara, like yours." Clara touched the locket gently. Later, Silas approached Elara as she stood by the small fence plot where Martha lay. Wildflowers, blue lupin and yellow balsam root, were beginning to bloom. Elara held a small bunch she'd gathered. "For her," she said quietly, not looking at him. She made space for strays. She placed the flowers gently on the simple wooden marker. Silas nodded, a lump in his throat. He pulled something from his pocket, a thin, sturdy silver chain, salvaged from Martha's few precious things. "For the locket," he said, offering it, so it don't get lost again. Elara's fingers brushed his as she took it. Her eyes, when she met his, held the ghost of the cage and the fire, but also a fragile, undeniable light. "Thank you, Silas," she whispered. "Not just for the chain." He looked past her. Ben was showing Sam how to whittle. Lily was hanging wash. Singing softly to Maisie perched on the porch step. Clara knelt in her dirt patch, carefully planting seeds saved from last year's flowers. The river stone Lily had given Elara sat on the windowsill, catching the late afternoon sun. The jagged scar on Elara's temple would never fade. The memory of Martha was a constant ache. The shadow of Coyle's trial loomed. But in this high valley, under the vast Montana sky, Silas Grant saw not just 5 children, but 6 souls bound by chains they'd broken together. Dawn, finally unbroken, warmed the weather of the porch, and for the first time in a long, hard winter, the silence held not dread, but the cautious, resilient hum of family rebuilding. He took a deep breath of sage-scented air, the weight still there, but shared. It was enough. For now it was enough.